Hello, Class 10th. I, Mrs. Sonia Singh, is back again to continue with the chapter Life Processes. And the topics for today are respiration and transportation. Let us start with respiration first. Before continuing with it, let's study an activity. Take some freshly prepared lime water in two separate test tubes. Lime water is calcium hydroxide solution. Blow air through the first lime water. In another test tube, blow air through lime water using a syringe. What will you observe in both the test tubes? You will see that the test tube in which you exhaled air turned lime water milky faster, and the test tube in which syringe was used to blow air, it took some time to turn milky. Why did lime water turn milky? It turned milky due to carbon dioxide. Now, what do we conclude from this activity? We can say that exhaled air or the air which we blew from our mouth contained of carbon dioxide in greater quantity than in the air in the syringe. We have discussed nutrition in organisms in the last section. The food material taken in during the process of nutrition is used in cells to provide energy for various life processes. Diverse organisms do this in different ways. Some use oxygen to break down glucose completely to carbon dioxide and water. Some use other pathways and do not involve oxygen. In all cases, the first case in breakdown of glucose, which is a 6 carbon molecule into a 3 carbon molecule called the process takes place in cytoplasm. Further, the pyruvate may be converted into ethanol and carbon dioxide. This process takes place in yeast during fermentation. Since this process takes place in the absence of oxygen, it is called anaerobic respiration. Breakdown of pyruvate using oxygen takes place in the mitochondria. This process breaks up the 3 carbon pyruvate molecule to give 3 molecules of carbon dioxide. The other product is water. Since this process takes place in the presence of oxygen, it is called aerobic respiration. The release of energy in this aerobic process is a lot greater than in the anaerobic process. Sometimes, when there is a lack of oxygen in our muscle cells, which could be due to excessive use of muscular activities, another pathway for the breakdown of pyruvate is taken. Here, the pyruvate is converted into lactic acid, which is also a 3 carbon molecule. This buildup of lactic acid in our muscles during sudden activity causes cramps. The energy released during cellular respiration is immediately used to synthesize a molecule called ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, which is used to fuel all other activities in the cell. In these processes, ATP is broken down, giving rise to a fixed amount of energy which can derive the endothermic reactions taking place in the cell. Since the aerobic respiration pathway depends on oxygen, aerobic organisms need to ensure that there is sufficient intake of oxygen. Plants exchange gases through stomata. There are large intercellular spaces between them where carbon dioxide and oxygen are exchanged by diffusion. They can go into cells or away from them and out into the air. The direction of diffusion depends upon the environmental conditions and the requirement of the plant. At night, when there is no photosynthesis occurring, carbon dioxide elimination is the major exchange activity going on. During the day, carbon dioxide generated during respiration is used up for photosynthesis. Hence, there is no carbon dioxide release. Instead, oxygen release is the major event at this time. Animals have evolved different organs for the uptake of oxygen from the environment and for getting rid of the carbon dioxide produced. You must have observed fish in an aquarium. They open and close their mouth, and the gill slits behind their eyes also open and close. They do it very fast. Do you know why? Since the amount of dissolved oxygen is fairly low as compared to the amount of oxygen in the air, the rate of breathing in aquatic organisms is much faster than that seen in the terrestrial organisms. Fishes take in water through their mouth and force it past the gills where the dissolved oxygen is taken up by blood. Terrestrial organisms use the oxygen in the atmosphere for respiration. This oxygen is absorbed by different organs in different animals. All these organs have a structure that increases the surface area which is in contact with the oxygen rich atmosphere. Since the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide has to take place across this surface is very fine and delicate. In order to protect this surface, it is usually placed within the body. So there have to be passages that will take air to this area. In addition, there is a mechanism for moving the air in and out of this area where the oxygen is absorbed. In human beings, air is taken into the body through nostrils. The air passing through the nostrils is filtered by fine hairs that line the passage. The passage is also lined with mucus, which helps in this process. From here, the air passes through the throat and into the lungs. Rings of cartilage are present in the throat. These ensure that the air passage does not collapse. Within the lungs, the passage divides into smaller tubes which finally terminate in balloon like structures which are called alveoli. The alveoli provide surface where the exchange of gases can take place. The walls of alveoli contain an extensive network of blood vessels. When we breathe in, we lift our ribs and flatten our diaphragm, and the chest cavity becomes larger as a result. Because of this, air is sucked into the lungs and fills the expanded alveoli. The blood brings carbon dioxide from rest of the body for release into the alveoli, and the oxygen in the alveolar air is taken up by blood in the alveolar blood vessels to be transported to all the cells in the body. Respiratory pigments take up oxygen from the air in the lungs and carry it to tissues which are deficient in oxygen before releasing it. In human beings, the respiratory pigment is hemoglobin, which has a very high affinity for oxygen. This pigment is present in the red blood cells. Carbon dioxide is more soluble in water than oxygen is and hence is mostly transported in the dissolved form in our body. So, class 10th, let's start with the topic transportation. In your class 9th, you had studied about a fluid connective tissue. Can you say what is it? Yes, it's blood. Do you remember the components of blood? Yes, it consists of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. Can you recall the functions of each component? Plasma transports food, carbon dioxide, and nitrogenous waste in dissolved form. Oxygen is carried by red blood cells. White blood cells help in building immunity by manufacturing antibodies. Platelets help in clotting blood at the site of leakage where otherwise there would be a loss of pressure which would reduce the efficiency of pumping system. We have a pumping organ which helps in circulation of blood. Can you guess what is it? Heart. Heart is a muscular organ which is as big as our fist. The heart has different chambers to prevent oxygen rich blood from mixing with the blood containing carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide rich blood has to reach the lungs for the carbon dioxide to be removed, and the oxygenated blood is then pumped to the rest of the body. Oxygen rich blood from the lungs comes to the thin walled upper chamber, the left atrium or the left auricle. The left atrium relaxes when it is collecting this blood. It then contracts while the next chamber, the left ventricle, expands so that the blood is transferred to it. When the muscular left ventricle contracts, the blood is pumped out to the body. Deoxygenated blood comes from the body to the upper chamber on the right atrium or auricle as it expands. As the right atrium contracts, the corresponding lower chamber, the right ventricle, dilates. This transfers the blood to the right ventricle, which in turn pumps it to the lungs for oxygenation. Since ventricles have to pump blood into various organs, they have thicker muscular walls than the auricles do. Valves ensure that blood does not flow backwards when the auricles and ventricles contract. The separation of right side and the left side of the heart is useful to keep oxygenated and deoxygenated blood from mixing. Such separations allows a highly efficient supply of oxygen to the body. This is useful in animals that have high energy needs, such as birds and mammals, which constantly use energy to maintain their body temperature. These animals are warm-blooded animals. In animals that do not need energy for this purpose, the body temperature depends on the temperature in the environment. Such animals like amphibians or many reptiles have three-chambered hearts and tolerate some mixing of the oxygenated and deoxygenated blood streams. These type of animals are called cold-blooded animals. Fishes, on the other hand, have only two chambers to their hearts, and the blood is pumped to the gills, is oxygenated there, and passes directly to the rest of the body. Thus, blood goes only once through the heart in the fish during one cycle of passage through the body. On the other hand, it goes through heart twice during each cycle in other vertebrates. This is known as double circulation. Let's talk about the blood vessels that carry blood to and away from heart. These are of three types: arteries, veins, and capillaries. Arteries are the vessels which carry blood away from the heart to various organs of the body. Since the blood emerges from the heart under high pressure, the arteries have thick, elastic walls. Veins collect the blood from different organs and bring it back to the heart. They do not need thick walls because the blood is no longer under pressure. Instead, they have valves that ensure that the blood flows only in one direction. On reaching an organ or tissue, the artery divides into smaller and smaller vessels to bring the blood in contact with all the individual cells. The smallest vessels have walls which are one cell thick and are called as capillaries. Exchange of material between the blood and surrounding cells takes place across this thin wall. The capillaries then join together to form veins that convey the blood away from the organ or tissue. There is another type of fluid also involved in transportation. This is called lymph or tissue fluid. Through the pores present in the walls of capillaries, some amount of plasma, proteins, and blood cells escape into intercellular spaces in the tissue to form tissue fluid or lymph. It is similar to the plasma of blood but colorless and contains less protein. Lymph drains into lymphatic capillaries from the intercellular spaces, which join to form large lymph vessels that finally open into larger veins. Lymph carries digested and absorbed fat from intestine and drains excess fluid from extracellular space back into the blood. This was all for today. We'll continue transportation in plants and excretion in animals and in plants in the next session. Thank you and have a nice day.